Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment. I think Mr. Sherman maybe missed the point. I mean, a lot of the bills that we're looking at today kind of feed into the overall discussion that I think is happening. So I think I would disagree with that. Following the financial crisis in 2008, we saw several Western countries, especially Greece, which really was stark. I remember talking to a friend of mine who had been traveling and had been to Greece and actually experienced the idea of having to go to an ATM to get some type of currency, and it was shut down. It was unavailable. So we kind of think of this, I think, in an abstract, that a lot of the issues that we're facing right now, couldn't happen here. It's just not believable. But I think it is, and I think it's real, and I think that's what this committee is trying to focus on. So a common problem was the leverage. It was transferred from individuals and institutions basically to the government. And obviously, the United States is in a different position because we have the dollar as a global reserve currency, as been brought up many times today. The CBO estimates the U.S. federal debt could reach 195% of GDP by 2053, so a different date than what we were talking about earlier with Social Security. But, Mr. Arkin, how long do you think we can maintain, or God forbid, keep adding to this level of debt before we experience a debt crisis like some of the smaller European countries have already faced?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's a bit of an unknown. I think the thing that we focus on is the risk involved with that ratio going up and up and up. But what that number is really not known, and that's why I think we're trying to emphasize the importance of having a long-term plan now that will look out 30 years in the future, and what kind of revenue, what kind of spending policy would put us on a more sustainable fiscal path.
Yeah, and my second comment, I guess, would be, if you remember when President Clinton was here and we had the increased revenue, you can argue some of it created by the dot-com and other high-tech industries that just exploded in the 90s. But at that point, there was kind of this idea that there was an ebb and flow related to the debt. So what would you say are the signs now that we've kind of moved away from that and we can't rely as members of Congress on the idea that suddenly there's going to be this, complete shift in the economy that's going to bail us out at some point?
Yeah, I think, you look historically, and average debt to GDP over time was more in the 40 to 50% range for many, many decades, and it's really the last 20 plus years or so where that's changed, where it's just gone on an upward trajectory.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is in the 90s, when you look at old age and retirement programs, you had kind of the boomers that were entirely working, right? This historically large population that was feeding into some of those trust funds, and a smaller generation taking out. And then another thing that's happened in recent decades has been healthcare costs that have grown faster than the economy at large. It's a thing that we're kind of trying to figure out is going to continue or not, and that wasn't quite as pronounced at that time. So I agree that the economic boom at that time was also contributing to the declining debt to GDP, but those kind of old age and retirement programs were in a different phase, you could think of, as opposed to now.
Right. My final comment would be, if you read, there's been a number of articles written about the red tide, which is simply the debt is going to continue to grow, obviously under the generation that currently is moving through our population. Medicaid is still the ultimate driver of that debt. I mean, there's a lot of focus on Social Security, but it's still Medicaid and the growth there as related to the costs associated with that continues to just balloon. So I think oftentimes Social Security and Medicaid get lumped together in this discussion, but that's not really accurate, is it?
Yeah, I think the biggest driver looking into the future are federal health care programs in terms of increases in spending. You do have the aging of the population that affects Social Security and Medicare, but as Grant mentioned, it's kind of this excess cost of health care, above the rate of inflation that really drives things in the future.
And then also interest costs. I mean, when you get 2 and 3 decades out, it's really the interest costs, something we don't really control very well, that's more set by kind of international economic outcomes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, I yield back.